Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. So, it's been a while, and my apologies for that. Initially I was waiting for a reshuffle in the tiers, but that ended up not happening, and down the line I ran into some troubles and couldn't dedicate as much time as I needed to the game to make videos. I'll talk about it a bit more at the end, but for now it looks like I'll have enough time to get back to these properly. Hooray! And as an apology, I have something quite exciting to give away this time. Up for grabs is an original tank recognition manual from 1942. As you can see, it's been through the wars, quite literally, but is still completely readable. I'm told this belonged to a Churchill commander in the war, but it didn't come with any verification. Inside are silhouettes and photos of AFVs, mostly Allied, but there are some German, Italian and Japanese vehicles featured as well. Alongside this are some tank engagement tactics and doctrine, and overall it's just a really nice little handbook. Because of the nature of this prize, I want the requirements for winning it to be pretty hard, and as it's a manual for tank recognition, I thought it's only fitting that to win it, you lot would have to correctly identify some tanks. And here they are. Number 1, Number 2, Number 3, and Number 4. High quality versions of each can be found in the description below. A couple are very hard, I know, but I just wanted this to go to someone who's very good at recognising tanks. And hey, the harder it is, the less correct answers, so all the more chance of winning it. All you need to do is structure your comment like this, and write the name of the tank exactly how it appears in game. So share the pictures around, and best of luck. Anyway, let's get to the video, and as always, I really hope you enjoy. Just a quick mention before we start properly is the removed M60A1 Premium. This was one of the Italian pre-order vehicles and was on sale until the last patch. However, unlike the American version, the M60A1 Ariete that Italy used didn't actually have a stabilizer historically. Now, as Gaijin realised this after the fact, they were put in a bit of a sticky situation. They initially planned to lower its BR to 7.7, but this rightfully upset a few people that bought the product as it was with a stabilizer. Gaijin could have got into a bit of trouble potentially if they'd altered it, as there's a law around modifying a digital product after it's been bought by a consumer, so they did the only thing they really could do and removed it from sale, but let everyone who bought it keep it. Because of this, they likely won't bring it back on sale and will probably be replacing it with something else in the future. Additionally, with hidden vehicles in the future of this series, I'll just be lightly touching on them as it's not really fair of me to go over a vehicle that most players likely won't have access to. Anyway, on to the mainline vehicles. So, first off we have the AUBL-74, or just the Orbital. This is a wheeled armoured car on the same chassis as the Fiat recoilless rifle carrier, so the hull only gets 6mm of armour and the turret doesn't really fare much better either. It's equipped with a 90mm gun with heat, hesh and smoke, and the gun performance is quite similar to the RU-251, but the heat has a tiny bit less penetration power, but it's not really noticeable. Now, it's a bit hard to describe this one. It can be very effective, but its effectiveness ceiling is very low. It can do standard light tank things well, but you're likely not going to carry many games in it. But as it is a support light tank, you shouldn't really be doing that anyway, it's not the vehicle's role. It is probably the best vehicle for getting assists though actually. Whenever I have a warbond task to get assists, this is what I use. The gun will almost always pen, and you're almost always going to take out at least one crew member, which guarantees you an assist. But as light tanks go, it fills its role decently well. The gun works, the mobility is good once upgraded, and it can't take hits. Standard stuff really. So, the most important, if vague, piece of advice I can give regarding this tank is don't try and be a hero. You're not a medium tank and you can't reliably play like one. Your armour is incredibly weak and basically everything poses a threat to you. You're going to need to stay out of sight and keep using your active scouting ability. Flanking will work on some maps, but you are going to need to be careful. As a wheeled vehicle, your static directional mobility is pretty poor. You can't dogfight with other tanks or change your direction reliably enough to win these encounters. I'd stick around teammates and in cover. Additionally, I'd actually seriously consider only playing this in an up tier, so around 7.7 or so, because these later tanks are a lot easier to kill. The crew are usually more compact and in a straight line on one side of the vehicle, meaning your little heat round can be used a lot more effectively. The 6.7 or so era of tanks you can still pen pretty easily, but their crew are usually a lot more spread out, so one-shotting them is very hard unless you land a perfect shot or hit the ammo. You can still be a good support tank here, but I feel it would be a lot more effective at the higher BRs. Anything to avoid the onslaught of 50 cals. So, Pros: good mobility, decent firepower, and functional in its role. And the cons: very weak armor, and poor versatility. Verdict: consider it. It's a toss-up really between this and the R3 recoilless rifle carrier, and it's mainly down to your preference. Either will fit nicely as a backup in a higher tier lineup, and they both have their quite unique advantages, and because of this I can't really say which one is objectively better, though I'd lean more towards the R3, but that's just my opinion. So give them both a try. Right, onto one of the main draws of Italy, the Santoro. It might not be everything you've ever dreamed of, but it is still capable. It's equipped with the standard 105mm gun with the usual ammo options, and it's very quick on practically all terrain, apart from sand and snow of course. It is equipped with a stabilizer as well, but not a very good one. It stops functioning reliably at about 40 km an hour, and even before that it is still pretty bouncy. Also, despite the low armor, it is artificially survivable. This is down to the low armor thickness, which causes very little spooling, and because it's also very large, there's a lot of empty space inside the vehicle, so you'll rarely lose your ability to fire and your ability to move in the same shot, and with the considerable speed you have forwards and in reverse, you can usually slip out of sight, repair and re-engage. As for playstyle, it is a bit of a mixed bag. It is very versatile, so you can play it in basically any sensible way you want. It'll mould nicely around an aggressive or passive playstyle. But the strongest advantage you have really is your speed, so you might as well use it. I recommend using a good initial push of speed to get to a nice spot that covers a common route the enemy team will take, and just hover around that area. Your static mobility is good, so you can quite easily dip in and out of cover to fire. If you are firing behind cover though, try and reverse out to take a shot. The turret is located very far back on the hull, so you'll be exposing much less of it to incoming fire this way. Also, I wouldn't rely on the stabilizer if you are on the move. It's just way too unreliable and only really works effectively if you're playing somewhat sedentary. It only works well at low speed, so it will work just fine if you're driving out of cover to fire. Also, I know it's pretty hard to adapt to, but try not to angle at all. From the front, your upper hull is very bouncy, and from the side, there's a fair chance the incoming round won't really hit anything critical. If you angle even slightly front on, you're leaving your partial side armor open to fire, which leaves a lot more modules and crew vulnerable. So, pros: good survivability, great mobility, and decent firepower. And the cons: poor stabilization, and weak to autocannon fire. Verdict: get it. It is a very functional vehicle, especially in an up tier, which is pretty important. It's a good backup at the higher BRs, as its speed is always going to be effective, and I'd say this is the best place for it. You could main a lineup around it, but I wouldn't say it's worth dragging the 7.7s into it as backups, as it somewhat lessens their effectiveness, and speaking of which, we're covering those next. So, next up is the M47-105-55. Armor-wise, it's very similar to the M47 in the US tree, but this one gets a weaker engine, one less crew member, but it does get the improved 105mm gun with the usual ammo options Heat, Hesh and Sabo. Additionally, despite the model, it doesn't actually have a working rangefinder. So this is the classic example of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none kind of vehicle. Its armor is okay, it's not too slow, and the gun works, though it doesn't really excel in any field. In an equal encounter, any vehicle it meets of a similar BR will likely have at least one advantage over it. That being said, the benefit of a vehicle like this is that it's adequate, at least in every factor: armor, mobility and firepower, which means it's quite versatile. You can take it out and fill any conventional role with it. It can defend, snipe, attack, etc. So you won't really find a situation or a map where there's nothing you can do, which does count in the vehicle's favour. However, practically all 7.7 MBTs in the game can do this too. Only difference is, they all, apart from maybe the M60, have a somewhat unique advantage over the others. The key to success in a vehicle like this, and well, to be honest, most vehicles, is knowing where to position yourself, and this one works quite passively, sniping or covering a sightline. I'd say I've definitely had the most success with it at range. It can function at closer ranges, sure, but the only problem is that its static reactionary mobility isn't very good. Its turret drive and reverse gear are quick, but not really enough to rely on. As well as this, its acceleration is really bad, especially when stock. I'd recommend playing this one around hard cover as a sniper, as your best mobility aspect is the reverse gear, meaning you can easily slip back into cover after poking out and taking a shot. Another benefit of being hull down is that I found the M47 is actually pretty hard to one-shot through the turret, unless it's APHE of course, so for what it's worth it is quite survivable. So, pros: versatile, decent firepower, and decent survivability. And the cons: sluggish, and poor stock grind. Verdict: consider it. I'd say the best use for this vehicle is inherently as a backup. As the Italian tree is quite sparse, you're going to need all the backups you can get. The gun will work fine, and on most maps you can reliably find a decent spot to sit in and support the team. I wouldn't say it's a necessity having it, but having it as a backup is a good choice, I'd say. And luckily, the vehicle to use it as a backup with is coming up next. So next up is the OF40. This is Italy's main MBT, and as the 7.7s go, it really is one of the best. Mobility wise, it's very similar to the Leo 1, just a little bit slower, and protection wise, it's pretty great. The turret has a lot of odd angles internally, making it pretty bouncy. The upper front plate is pretty good as well. The Russian 100mm can't pen it with APHE unless it's within a few hundred meters. And if angled and at range, most guns will really start to struggle. The lower front plate is of course a weak spot, but overall, pretty sound protection for what it is. Firepower wise, it has the same 105mm with all the usual rounds, but it does get a laser rangefinder, and for 7.7 this is pretty insane. With a good crew, you can range out to around 5,000 meters in less than a second, which is faster than practically everything at the tier. You can outsnipe basically anything. In fact, there aren't really too many downsides to this tank. I'm actually struggling to think of some. And unlike the previous vehicle, this is more jack of all trades, master of, well, all. Only negative I guess is that its armour isn't always going to be reliable and heat will still punch right through. As for playstyle, a benefit of this vehicle having lots of positives going for it means there are lots of ways of playing it as well. At 7.7 it can brawl pretty well, baiting shots with your angled front plate works great, and whatever round you decide to use will likely not have any trouble. On some of the bigger maps though, and at the higher BRs, this thing really does excel as a sniper. When you unlock the rangefinder, you'll be ranging out tanks almost instantly, and unless the vehicle you're fighting gets lucky, you'll almost always hit them first. For this reason, it works best at, I'd say, an extremely long range, so on maps like Maginot Line, where there's lots of cover and sniping spots for both teams. This is this tank's ideal environment. Not to say it doesn't work well in all other situations, quite the opposite, but at 7.7 it is the only vehicle with a laser sight, which means that at its BR, and as it's a bit rarer a few ranks above as well, you will have the potential to range in other tanks faster than any other vehicle, meaning that in a sniping engagement, as long as you have a good firing solution, you will always land the first aimed shot, which is an advantage you can't really overlook. If sniping isn't your cup of tea though, you can still do everything else to a good standard just by employing common game sense, and I won't waste your time by going over all that. So, pros: mobile, good survivability, decent firepower, and of course the rangefinder. And the cons? Well, only thing I can really say is that the armour can't completely be relied on. Verdict? Of course, get it, it's one of the best 7.7s in my opinion and will nicely mould around your playstyle. It works in an up tier and is very dangerous in a down tier. This one is definitely worth sticking with and spading. For our only SPA this tier we have the Saddam 25. This is a quad 20mm AA on the M113 chassis. Now it does have a radar, though it's an optical radar which basically just uses a laser rangefinder and some things you ignored in maths. It works well enough though, but you do need to be facing directly at the aircraft you want to track. So the radar is a bit tricky, but the guns are very effective regardless. If you're hitting a plane at a good angle, it usually one-shots with a single round. It does also get a anti-tank sabot belt, which can be very effective on light vehicles or if you get a side shot, however it is only 15 rounds per gun, so use it very sparingly. For 8.0 though, it is decent. It's still beaten by the Gepard and Type 87 due to their long range ability, but at close range this has been probably the best AA to use in my opinion. It's a lot nicer to aim than the Shilka, and the spread of the guns works very well if your aim is a bit off. Additionally, it's a lot smaller than other anti-air vehicles, which really does work in its favour, as aircraft will usually try and prioritise them, so you might be able to get the jump on them a little bit easier using this vehicle. As for playstyle, there's not really a lot I can say, as it has very limited anti-tank ability. You're better off just staying behind some lateral cover and shooting at aircraft when they get close. I wouldn't spray at range, but wait until the plane is a bit closer to you before you start firing. So, pros, good anti-air ability, and the cons, sluggish, poor anti-tank ability, and fairly low ammo. Verdict, get it. You'll likely be spending a fair bit of time around 8.0, so you're gonna need a capable anti-air vehicle. It does the job very well, not the best, not the worst, but it'll see you through nicely until you work your way up to the automatic. Lastly today, we have the M113A1 TOW. This is exactly what it looks like. It's an M113 with a fella poking out the top controlling a TOW missile launcher. And it's a bit of a hard vehicle to describe really. It can situationally work very, very well, but generally and especially when stock, it can be quite frustrating to use. You can upgrade the TOW to the more powerful I-TOW, which does negate the armour of most tanks you'll be meeting. However, the launcher can't traverse very far to either side, and the gunner, bless him, is practically asking for MGs to be shot at him. From any range, the gunner isn't safe, which is a bit of a problem. Additionally, stock, it's very, very slow, and even when spaded, it's not too impressive either. The main advantage with this vehicle though is that it can fire from behind cover, keeping the hull completely safe. Same can't be said about the gunner, however. Additionally, it is quite survivable in a strange sense. The gunner is really easy to kill, but it can't be hull broken. And as the vehicle has 5 crew and thin armour, so less spalling, it's actually pretty hard to one-shot. I don't think I've ever actually been one-shot while playing it, though after a single hit you are likely to be disabled and unable to get out of the situation, so it doesn't really count for much. Best use for this vehicle is sniping at long range or sitting behind complete cover at close range. At longer distances, you're going to want to find targets that are in the open, or more specifically, targets that can't back out of sight of your missile. You only get 10 of them, so pick your targets carefully. Also, make sure you're covering a straight line of sight as well. Since you can't traverse the launcher very far, a flanking enemy is likely going to get you. Something cheeky you can do as well is sit completely behind cover but fire the missile over it, as the elevation arc is pretty decent. This can work at close range as you can't really scope in while doing this, but landing a shot will be tricky as the missile travels so quick. I still think your best use is to sit out of the way and cover a large spot of open ground. The missile is pretty easy to aim, so as long as you're not making yourself an easy target to hit, you should have a good shot at knocking out a couple of tanks on some maps. When spaded though, closer range has become more of a viable option, as your mobility, while still not great, is enough to keep yourself in relative safety. So, pros? Good firepower, and can fire behind cover. And the hefty cons: poor survivability, poor mobility, low ammo count, and low versatility. Verdict: consider it. I originally had avoid it for the verdict here, but after playing it a lot more, I think I realised its quirks. I'd still only play it on certain maps and in positions where you are completely in cover, though I still wouldn't main a lineup off it. It's a decent backup for 8.7 or if you have the M60, but the advantages of the 7.7 tanks aren't worth nullifying for this thing. Though, if you have good map knowledge, this one will treat you well. Right, there we are guys, that's all the vehicles for today. But before we look at the lineups, I will quickly touch on the aircraft. There's only really 2 this time around, and they are the F-84G and the G91 pre-series. The F-84 can carry a ton of rockets, but I think we'd be better off with just taking the Tiny Tims or bombs, as the HFARs are a bit unreliable. The G91 is such a great aircraft for cast though. You get 2 Mighty Mouse rocket pods, which work to great effect as the aircraft has a very stable gun platform. Additionally, it's a very nimble fighter too. I'd seriously consider getting this one. It's a real joy to use and will even work well beyond its BR as well. Right, now onto the lineups, and there's only really 3 to choose from. And they are 7.7, 8.0 and 8.3, swapping out the Orbital for the R3 at your discretion. I'd say your best options are 7.7 and 8.3 though. The OF-40 is very capable at its BR and heads the lineup off very well. And the tow makes for an interesting vehicle to use at 8.3 with the Santoro as a backup, but only again, really if you have the M60. I'd only consider using 8.0 if you really like the Santoro, as it's not really worth lessening the effectiveness of the M47 and the OF40. Ultimately though, it's up to you, but this is what I would recommend. So there we are guys, really hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry if my voice was dying a bit towards the end there, it has a very annoying habit of doing that. And yeah, good luck in the competition. And yes, sorry I've been gone for so long. Initially it was that I was waiting for the tier reshuffling to happen, but either that's been delayed or it's not happening at all. And about a month or so ago I ran into, without really going into many details, I had a bit of money trouble, so I was kind of scrabbling around trying to sell some stuff to get my rent and my electric paid and stuff. It seems to be a bit better now. I'm not 100% sure, but it's looking like I should be able to get back to doing these quite consistently. So fingers crossed for that. Yeah, I won't ramble any longer and try and sympathy bait. You guys have much better things to do. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.